Now, I'm Randy May. I know many of you, and I know many of you know me, but just in case, I'm the president and founder of the Free State Foundation. If you've attended our events before, usually I don't add founder, but it seems like on this occasion, celebrating our 20th anniversary, I'll add founder. Just don't confuse me with the founders we're going to be talking about later that Jonathan Turley is going to talk about. Does anyone here recall the opening lyrics to one of my favorite Jimmy Buffett tunes, Changes in Latitude? Anyone know that tune? Okay, it goes like this. I took off for a weekend last month just to try and recall the whole year, all of the faces and all of the places, wondering where they all disappeared. I didn't ponder the question too long. I was hungry and went out for a bite, ran into a chum with a bottle of rum, and we wound up drinking all night. I always thought that was good. It's better when Jimmy Buffett is singing it, of course. Well, forget about the chum with a bottle of rum part, but I think it's only right to admit that I've spent several weekends the last few months trying to recall the Free State Foundation's last 2 decades. Don't worry, I'm not going to indulge myself or bore you by reciting a litany of my favorite events or publications, policy victories or defeats or so forth. I've done a lot of recalling recently, and I'm truly proud of what we've accomplished over the years. I'll just say, since the beginning, to only give you 2 figures, we published 849 perspectives from Free State Foundation scholars. That's our longer form paper format, and 2,444 blog posts. So that's a lot of ink spilled or keystrokes hit. If you get a chance, I think before we put up our image, we were running a photo reel of some of the photos from over the years, and we're going to do that during lunch, and that brings back a lot of memories for me. And also, if you get a chance, I hope you'll look at some of the videos that we've posted, video tributes that we've received. Among them, and there's some others, but from Richard Hudson, Olivia Trusty, Bill Kennard, Michael Powell, Minion Clyburn, Ajit Pai, Robert McDowell, and yesterday, one from Ted Cruz. So I'm proud of all of those. But what I'm most proud of, though, is that, at least to my mind, the Free State Foundation has remained true to its declared mission since its founding in 2006. Right from the beginning, our website proclaimed our mission was to, quote, to promote through research and educational activities understanding of free market, free speech, limited government, and rule of law principles, and to advocate laws and policies true to those principles. Regardless of who was president, which party controlled Congress, who was in charge of the FCC or elsewhere in government, as we've gone about our daily work, our North Star has been those foundational principles. Without taking any time to elaborate further now, I'll just say this: however difficult America's challenges may be today, and however difficult the challenges today may be in the policymaking arena in which we toil every day, I'm certain that the best way forward for America as we celebrate our 250th birthday, and for the Free State Foundation as it celebrates its 20th anniversary, is to be true to its founding vision. Indeed, that is the only way forward. Robert Frost, a quintessential American poet, declared, "Most of the change we think we see in life is due to truths being in and out of favor. Going forward, as it has been since 2006, FSF's mission will remain helping to ensure that free markets, free speech, limited government, and the rule of law endure as truths in favor, not out of favor." Now, with that, I just want to thank some people. I'm going to name some names, and because of the time constraints, I'm not going to say nearly as much as I should to give these people their full due. I just want to thank, first of all, I'm going to thank the members of our board of directors, Ken Kane, Tom Talkey, and Ken Howard. Tom Talkey, I know, and Ken Kane had made plans to, they're out of town, really. I think I'm not sure whether Ken Howard made it. Ken Howard's over there, so thank you, Ken. I want to thank some members of the Free State Foundation staff, with the understanding that I can't thank all of them, and particularly going back in history. Seth Cooper, who's here today. Seth is now Adjunct Senior Fellow, and you're going to hear from Seth a little later. Kathy Baker, our Communications and Events Coordinator, has been with the Free State Foundation almost from the beginning. Andrew Long, a Senior Fellow. Joe Kennedy, a newly arrived Senior Fellow and Director of Policy Studies. And our most recent addition is Kathy Sanchez, who's here today. Kathy, since you're new, if you can wave your, Kathy's in the back. Kathy is a research and communications specialist who joined us several months ago and is doing terrific work. Now, I want to thank my wife, Laurie. In addition to being Secretary-Treasurer of the Foundation from the beginning, when we started, I'll just say, we didn't have anything. We didn't take salaries for several months, and Laurie was concerned about how much work she was undertaking at that time. She was doing some other things, and I assured her it wouldn't be that much, and and things changed fairly rapidly. And but not only has she done all that's required of her as Secretary Treasurer, of course she's done so much more and in so many different ways, and most of all, she's been a source of tremendous moral support, and I'm very grateful to Laurie for that. Now, I'm going to thank members of our Board of Academic Advisors. If you get a chance, if you haven't done it recently, you ought to look at the website and you'll see what a prestigious group of academic advisors we have at FSF, and you're going to hear from 5 of them very shortly. Let's see, I want to remind you, don't forget to tweet if you're a tweeter. It's hashtag FSF celebrates 20. Hashtag FSF celebrates 20. So without any further ado, because we're going to have a tight schedule today, I wanted to get a lot in. We're going to turn to our panel, but I think everyone knows the agenda, so we're going to have this discussion until about 12:50. Then I'm going to ask Seth Cooper to give some remarks for a few minutes. Then we're going to serve lunch. Lunch will be served, and Arielle Roth, NTIA administrator, will come on at 1:30, and right after her, Jonathan Turley will be discussing his new book. So that is the plan. Now, I said how proud I was of our academic advisory board, and again, I commend that list to you, but these are some of the real stars of that board, and I'm really excited to have them here with us. What we're going to do in this session, I've asked each of them to talk about the future, not the past so much, but the future. And I'm going to I'll introduce them as they speak. I'm going to go in alphabetical order here, and the bios are on your table, and so I'm not going to say more than just a sentence or two about each one, and you've got the bio with you. So first, we're going to hear from Michelle Connolly. Michelle is a professor of the practice in the economics department at Duke University. She previously served twice as chief economist at the FCC. As far as I know, I don't think this has changed. Michelle's the only person to have served twice as chief economist. I know she's the only one from Duke to have done it, and that's important. That's important for me. And on that note, I'll just add, the only other thing I'll add about Michelle is that because of my own relationship that I have with Duke, I know for a fact personally that Michelle is one of the most widely admired professors really at Duke, and especially by the students who count most. So Michelle is going to, the topic I gave her, but I've told all of them they can free to wonder a bit within a 6 minute, or everyone's going to have 6 minutes, but Michelle's topic is the future of universal service subsidies in a competitive marketplace. So Michelle, why don't you lead us off, please?
Thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit about the economics and give some numbers, but stories oftentimes sit with us a little bit more. And less than 2 weeks ago, there was this amazing article in the Anchorage Daily News and ProPublica by Kyle Hopkins entitled, "This Convicted Felon Gets $1 million a Year to Sell Obsolete Internet Service. You Pay for It." Another indication of how good the article is. So I would recommend that you send this to all your congressmen and all FCC commissioners. He also quotes Daniel Lyons, an indication of how well thoroughly researched the article was. So I'm going to give you just a couple of points that I took out of this. This is a literal quote. "A telecom on the Aleutian island of Andak receives more than $350,000 a year to provide phone and low-speed internet services to 306 buildings. Even though the State Department of Labor says the island is home to fewer than 80 people. One business owner said everyone he knows on the island has moved on to Starlink anyway." GCI, which is Alaska's largest telecom and largest USF recipient, and I believe Alaska is the state that receives the most USF funding, had a fraud allegation in 2023. It settled with DOJ for $40 million. In 2025, it received $466 million in continued subsidies. And one of the key things here is that the article mentions is the program subsidies are based on lines covered, not customers. So the article is titled about this convicted felon. He was convicted for tax evasion, and his phone services were taken away because he was trying to run his telephone telecom company from prison. He has received $12 million over the past decade, originally to try and deliver to internet service to 337 locations. He currently has about 160 total customers. So all of this amounts to about receiving approximately $800 per month per customer. Convicted felon. All right, so this is all to point out, kind of what is actually happening, and I think summarizes very well some of the problems with the current Universal Service Fund. My point is that regardless of what the original intent was, the USF has really become purely an entitlement program. Why do I say this? As Daniel Lyons has mentioned before, there's really never been any analysis by the FCC or anyone else in the government about whether there actually exists any benefit to all of this money that's been spent. The only study that's ever been done was done by some economists. It was on Link Up. It showed that had some value, but not so much Lifeline. And of course, that was the one benefit that was canceled by the FCC. So they're always talking about spending, but spending is not success, and spending doesn't necessarily guarantee benefits relative to what would have happened otherwise. Money is being spent as if there's no tomorrow. The majority of which is in high-cost service, the high-cost fund, and a majority of that is still based on what's called rate of return, where firms simply say, oh, I spend this much money. These are my costs. I need a certain rate of return, and so the higher my costs, the more I get in subsidies. Some of these subsidies have gone to pay for the owner's son to go to college. That's part of their cost because he was working part-time. Those kinds of things. Even the administrative costs have been ballooning. In 2000, they were around 43 million. In 2023, they were 368 million. This is the administrative cost by the agency that runs this. So, and I was looking at, this also covers E-rate for schools. When I was looking up information on this, I find there are these consulting groups that say, hire us, we will help you get this money. So there's a cottage industry of administering and finding these funds. And this is all legal because this is based on providing access, not even necessarily providing service. As we can see, there's a little punishment from fraud. And all of this is based on a completely anachronistic notion of technology. It's currently supporting the most expensive sources of access to telephony and broadband, and at lower qualities. It's ignoring competition, even in the same service areas, and it's especially ignoring competition in the same service areas by providers who are not being subsidized, such as Starlink. Why is this an entitlement program that still exists? Well, because of political pressure. Political pressure is protecting these entitlements. Historically, and even to this day, it supports landline telephony in high-cost areas. Historically, it was not only to one, but to anyone who could provide any telephony service in these areas. In 2011, broadband was added, which was great. We'd rather subsidize broadband access than telephony access, I think, in this day and age, since broadband access is inherently going to give you telephony. And they appropriately, at that time, used a reverse auction system to make sure you only had one service provider that was being subsidized. However, they wrote the rules and made final decisions for these kinds of auctions that intentionally excluded certain technologies that could, and in some cases already did, provide service more cheaply and more quickly, and be deployed more quickly. All of these pressures keep causing the FCC to change the definition of broadband to increase the speeds and latency requirements in order to exclude certain technologies, because this allows us to say that certain areas are unserved or underserved, even though they have been served in the past. And in this way, they can exclude certain technologies. And once the newer technologies like low Earth orbit actually could break those, fit those rules, they still somehow said that this was an unproven technology, despite the fact that it's deployed throughout the United States. There's been no set budget limit, just keeps increasing. It's funding from a distortionary and regressive tax base, and they simply keep increasing the contribution factor. We used to be around 5% in the 2000s. Now we're expecting, or analysts are expecting, a 42.3% contribution factor in the next quarter. And so this is all to say that right now, the money that I'd say the huge majority is just money going into a sinkhole for entitlements, for old technologies, for fraud, at a time when low Earth orbit is already providing service at a faster rate and oftentimes cheaper monthly value. If we are still concerned with this, we need to focus only on households who do not currently have access, we need to focus on adoption, who have not yet adopted, who have financial need. The subsidies we should give them should be for upfront costs, and if there are to be monthly subsidies, they should be below the rate, certainly no higher than the rate of the lowest cost service, and ideally below, because someone should have skin in the game when they are ordering service.
Thank you, Michelle. I know I saw all of Michelle's pages that she has there, and I know I never have enough time for you to say all you should because it's so insightful. But maybe everyone up here, really, you professors, each could take 50 minutes like you do in a classroom, and we would all benefit. But today, and I didn't do a perfect job with Michelle on this, but I'm going to ask you to take everyone 6 minutes. We may have time for you to make a comment after we get through. So after that, have some interaction. So next up, John Duffy is the Samuel McCoy II Professor of Law at the University of Virginia Law School and Director of the Center on Intellectual Property Law in the class of 1966 Research Professor of Law. A lot of long titles that you hold.
I teach at UVA,
so
that's good enough.
So without more, I'm just going to say John and I have been friends for decades, and I'm really glad you're here. Take it away.
Thanks, Randy. I'm going to, despite what you say about the future, I always think that the best barometer of the future is to at least know where we've been. And I'm going to try to very quickly talk about administrative law and the trajectory of administrative law and what people in this room care about, which is freedom in new technological fields, which I think is the center of this think tank or organization. The beginnings of administrative law were in the progressive era, and there was a tremendous optimism about experts who could find their way to wise regulation. Now, I think we should all be in favor of wise regulation. Michelle, I think you'd say what your remarks could be summarized as this is bad regulation and not wise regulation. So the progressives were really interested in wise regulation, which I think we can agree with them, and they were very excited about the new technologies. Originally, this exciting new technology that was changing the nation of railroads and then later telephony and other things. Mid-20th century, today I think where the end point is that we've completely lost faith in the idea of independent experts. And that's going on at the Supreme Court right now with challenges to independent agency. But I want independent agencies and the independence of administrators. I want to tell you just quickly that that's not a new thing. That's not a Trump thing. That's a thing that's been going on for about 3/4 of a century. So that if you think about the future and you think like once Trump leaves office, we're going to have lots of independent agencies, everything will be restored, you're absolutely wrong. In 1950, President Truman accumulated enormous power by centralizing, by executive order, the power in independent agencies. A lot of the power was moved to a chair who was presidentially designated. And he had power to do this under the old Reorganization Acts, which were tremendous powers given in the 20th century, not recently, but in the 20th century to the president to reorganize government. That was an amazing power grab. And by and large, it went through. Agencies like the FTC and the SEC that previously were very independent and elected their chairs amongst the commissioners suddenly had a presidential designee. That trend has continued through the Reagan executive order that centralized rulemaking in the Office of Management and Budget. And gathered a lot of power. Originally, it was very controversial, and people thought, like, well, the next time a Democrat's in office, surely this won't continue. The next Democrat who comes in office is Bill Clinton. And not only does he continue the executive order, he extends it at least partially to independent agencies, which was quite radical at the time. And you think, like, well, surely that's going to be the high water mark. No, Elena Kagan, who worked in the Clinton administration, is, and now has some influence, I think, more than just being a law professor, I kind of think, publishes at the very end of the Clinton administration. The publication date is 2001, but it was written based on her experience in the Clinton administration. And the title of the article says it all, Presidential Administration. And it's about sort of noting and to some degree celebrating increased political control over administrative agencies directly by the White House. And then you think like, well, that's got to be the high water mark. Well, no. President Obama, when he was sort of stymied at getting things through Congress, said, I've got a pen. And he issued administrative orders or directed his underlings to issue administrative orders, and especially in immigration, most famously in the DACA orders. And then you think like, well, that's going to be the end. Obviously, President Trump, at the end of his first term, issued Schedule F, which was trying to bring the civil service under more political control. President Biden repealed that, but now in the second term, that's going forward as it's schedule policy / career, which I think is funny because it's schedule PC. And for those of you in the room old enough to remember what PC means, it's definitely not this administration. So that is a new thing. And I think one of my friends who teaches administrative law, who's not from the conservative side, said like, well, the next time a Democratic president is in office, would you, if you were the advisor to that president, say, oh, definitely repeal those orders that give more power to the White House? That's not going to happen. So I think in the future, we're going to see more political control, with the Fed being an exception. And if time were to permit, I'd talk about why that's true. But I think that there will still be technocratic control. Even in the White House, in the Office of Management and Budget, the Office of the OIRA, the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, has a lot of bean counters in it that try to do economic analysis, even within a deeply political structure. So I think that's going to continue. I will say the alternative theory is that we're going to have a radical retrenchment of the size of the administrative state, and that there is some people on the left, notably Ezra Klein, who has this sort of abundance theory that says like, well, we've got to just cut through all this red tape. And of course, those people will find allies on the right who say like, who've never been viewed as champions of the bureaucracy. I will close with saying I don't think that's going to happen for two reasons. One is Ezra Klein is kind of incoherent on that. He says he wants more government, but no red tape. And I just think like, fare thee well. Not going to happen. And the other thing is the alternative is not necessarily the wide open free market. Just this past week, Florida sued OpenAI in state courts. And so there is a taste for regulation on the left and on the right. And if it doesn't get done through some sort of agencies with some degree of expertise, it might get done in ways that actually the business community finds far worse.
Thank you, John.
I was close to 6.
No, you were close, and again, along with Michelle, those remarks were really insightful and relevant to almost all of us in the room in terms of what we do every day. Next up will be Joe Kennedy. Joe actually works for the Free State Foundation, so Joe, I'm going to enforce your time limit. I've got the hooks. Joe is going to, I've asked him to address the future of communications policy in an AI world. Joe Kennedy is Director of Communications Policy Studies and Senior Fellow at FSF. So go ahead, Joe. You got no more than 6 minutes.
Thank you for that introduction. It's my pleasure to be here for the 20th anniversary of Free State Foundation. Over the last few months, I've been honored to work with Randy May and take advantage of his incredible knowledge and kindness. I appreciate that. As he said, the title of my remarks is The Future of Communications Policy in an AI World. The central message behind my remarks is that without a modern, secure set of information networks with far more capacity than we have now, and without not capable of much faster transmission and compute speeds, and capable of making autonomous adjustments to itself, without all that, AI is almost worthless. While everyone has been focused on improving AI models, very few people have thought about the tremendous capacity needed to transfer, compute, and act on the massive data flows that this entails. It's made harder by the fact that information networks are different than others in 3 distinct ways. First, they operate in a global market in which the decisions of other nations have a significant effect on us. Issues that require negotiation include the fact that other nations can transmit and gather data in the US without our consent, especially if they use Wi-Fi and satellite technology. Second, the physical boundaries of ownership become more complicated in space and in common property such as the oceans. Also, one country's spectrum use or satellite policy can easily affect other nations. And then finally, every country has ongoing debates about content moderation and data storage. So you have all these negotiations. A second major difference is that most communication industries are converging together. No one knows what the best business strategies will be. We don't even know what the rules will be at that time, but we know it's changing. And last, most communication markets are currently undergoing rapid technological and structural innovation, putting stress on agency resources. In order to maximize the use of AI, the nature of the information networks needs to be fundamentally transformed. Luckily, AI will probably help us a great deal in building a better network. Key ways in which AI puts pressure on current information networks include the massive use of electricity and water, an increase in east-west data transfer where more data goes from CPU unit to another CPU unit rather than to an end user. This increases the relative importance of transmission speeds within the networks as opposed to computing speeds. There's also a greater reliance on uploading speeds as the Internet of Things and the direct-to-device technology results in AI systems that continuously monitor tens of billions of items. And then lastly, latency is going to have to fall dramatically, possibly affecting the physical location of major elements of the grid. The consequence of not having access to the AI networks will mean more than not being able to stream the World Cup matches. It will also mean being totally excluded from all of the benefits that AI promises. So where are we compared to where we need to be? Well, the importance of information network has strong strategic as well as economic consequences. So we need a strong, independent, competent, experienced regulator. And to my mind, FCC is the logical choice, but it needs to make some changes. It needs to get rid of the public interest standard. It serves no purpose, legitimate purpose in my mind. Second, it needs to give market issues, regulatory control issues for most of the companies that it currently supervises. It needs to transfer all that mainly over to the antitrust agencies and let the markets settle most issues. The FCC should focus on creating policies that allow the information networks to be modernized. This can best be done by creating an environment that encourages private investment, ensures national network security, manages spectrum and satellite issues, and promotes international standards. A good starting point is to continue to prepare for the ITU World Radio Communication Conference to be held October and November of next year in Shanghai. The administration needs to appoint a great leader and assemble a delegation. It also needs to do a
Joe,
better job.
you got to wrap it up quickly.
Okay. It also needs to do a better job of formulating international policies that our allies will support. In short, governments need to concentrate more on building the networks of the future and less on current contact and modes of delivery. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. I want to take just a second so I don't forget later. I saw that former commissioner and former acting chair Minion Clyburn came in. I appreciate your being here, Commissioner Clyburn. You've heard me say this before, but I want to say it again. Commissioner Clyburn has been a participant in so many events over the years. She's been very gracious about coming, and she would be first to admit, she just did it in the video that I mentioned when she offered her congratulations. She acknowledged that we often don't agree on things, but we do agree on a lot. But it's been important for me over the years to, in our events, to try and ensure that we have a diversity of perspectives that are discussed. And Commissioner Clyburn has really helped me do that over the years, because she's never been shy about offering her opinions when she's here, and I've appreciated it. So thanks for being here. Also, of course, former Commissioner Mike O'Reilly, who's an adjunct senior fellow, is here, and I'm going to say more about Mike a little later. So with that commercial interruption, we're now going to turn to Professor Daniel Lyons. Daniel's a professor of law, the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs, and the Dean's Distinguished Scholar at Boston College Law School. And I've asked Daniel, the topic I assigned to Daniel, which he can ignore if he wants to, is the future of the FCC's public interest doctrine in the digital age.
Great, well, thank you, and congrats to the Free State Foundation on 2 decades of excellence, Randy. It's really, really impressive stuff. So the past 2 decades at the FCC have largely involved battles about new technology, right? Net neutrality, broadband build-out, and such. But because of a confluence of a president who thinks it's 1985 and an FCC chair who recognizes the independent agency paradigm is on life support, the FCC suddenly really focused on old media again in a big way. And so talking about the public interest standard has become cool again. So whether it's tightening up the equal time rules and the PBS sponsorship rules, going full Tony Soprano on Jimmy Kimmel, right? We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Or accelerating AT&T's licensing review process over DEI concerns. Chairman Carr has aggressively used the public interest standard as a tool to help support the president's agenda. And these disputes have highlighted to a whole new generation of scholars the panoply of problems that the public interest standard has always presented. It's got vagueness, it's susceptible to capture and manipulation, and in the broadcast context, it's inconsistent with basic First Amendment principles. Now, to be fair, Randy and the Free State Foundation have been beating this drum for a long time, right? Even when it wasn't cool to do so. And their work is really a helpful reference as Carr's continuing to explore the doctrine's gray areas. The public interest standard gives the FCC an enormous amount of discretion without a whole lot of clear limiting principles. The language dates back to the New Deal, which, as Professor Duffy was talking a little bit about, right, was a vestige of a bygone era where people celebrated agencies as these like independent, nonpartisan, technocratic bureaucracies insulated from politics. Now, whether or not that was actually true, and I would say public choice theory threw a lot of cold water on that theory on its way to about a half dozen Nobel Prizes, it's certainly not the dominant view today. And Randy's argued that the standard violates the non-delegation doctrine, which prohibits Congress from delegating the legislative power. Justice Gorsuch was really interested in reinvigorating the doctrine, and for a while it looked like he had the votes to do so. But I think after the last term, it's probably unlikely, although he probably have my vote. Note to Senate staff, I said probably. That's not prejudging the case in case you're, looking for future nominees at some point. The public interest standard is also in tension with the deregulatory market-based approach that Congress has taken since the 1996 Act. It substitutes bureaucratic judgment for price signals, presupposing that FCC commissioners can identify the public interest better than competitive markets can. That was Coase's critique of the system way back in the 1950s in a paper that eventually gave rise to the famous Coase theorem. In the spectrum space, we've made a little bit of progress on this, right, because we're now shifted to auctions as a way of allocating initial licenses. But of course, renewals are still subject to the public interest standard, and broadcast licenses were exempt from auctions for reasons. Which brings us to, I think, the biggest problem with the public interest standard, the power that it gives the government over speech. There are some dicey cases at the margins of the First Amendment, but it should be a core First Amendment principle that the government cannot tell people what they can and cannot say. Florida can't dictate what's in the pages of the Miami Herald. Texas is learning that it can't dictate to social media platforms. But in the broadcast space, this happens far too often. And it's been a bipartisan effort. Like I often say about Trump, Chairman Carr is not doing anything different in kind than his predecessors. He's just turning it up to 11. Right? Chairman Newton Minnow's famous vast wasteland speech made the same license renewal threat that Chairman Carr has. Now, the problem, of course, is the Red Lion case. Red Lion famously decided in 1969 that broadcasters should have less robust First Amendment rights because the airwaves are scarce and because the government has an interest in making sure that the limited conduits of communication to the masses adequately present all viewpoints. But this isn't 1969. Scarcity isn't a thing. And I think it's highly likely that this court would overturn Red Lion if it was given a chance. Both Justices Thomas and Ginsburg have gone on record as saying it should be overturned. And when you spark that level of bipartisan criticism, you probably don't have much of a chance of survival. So what does the public interest standard look like going forward? I think it's easy to predict that the standard will remain problematic, especially as the Supreme Court pushes toward a more unitary executive and the FCC becomes more and more a tool of White House policy. One might argue that with the decline in broadcast's share of the digital media landscape, that standard becomes less important. Fair enough. But it still causes plenty of mischief in the context of spectrum licensing renewals, merger approval, and other areas. I think what's harder to predict is how this problem is going to be solved. I'd love to believe that our present experience is going to prompt a bipartisan solution. Right, like the independent counsel statute, once it took down people in both the Reagan and the Clinton administrations, everybody was like, maybe this is not a good idea, and they allowed it to sunset. But I fear this is unlikely because I think in the current political environment, the parties seem much more interested in deploying the powers of government to gore the other side's ox rather than see some kind of bilateral laying down of the weapons. But if Chairman Carr continues to use the standard to shape messaging over the airwaves, I think he may actually present the court with the long-sought opportunity to overturn Red Lion. In the 1990s, the court's recognition of the cable industry's First Amendment rights dramatically reshaped how that industry was being regulated, mostly for the better. A recognition of broadcasters' First Amendment rights would similarly reshape the FCC's approach to what's left of this industry, and it could sand down some of the public interest standards' more problematic edges. Now, of course, legislative reform is long overdue in the telecom space, and I would love for the next iteration of the Act to jettison the public interest standard and focus instead on consumer welfare as the regulatory touchstone. This would be a welcome change, one that I think acknowledges both the shift in our views about how agencies behave and also the conditions underpinning the market that this agency is tasked with regulating. Thanks.
Daniel, thanks very much.
How do you do?
Don't.
6 minutes?
What? Oh, pretty good, yeah. And don't get me started on the public interest standard, of course. I may not retire until we get rid of that thing. Last, but not least, of course, is Adam Mossoff. Adam is professor of law at Antonin Scalia Law School at George Mason University, and he teaches property, patent law, trade secrets, trademark law, remedies, and internet law. Sounds like a full plate. Now, we may possibly, if Adam adheres to his time limit, we may have time for each of you to offer just one cogent comment when we get through. So have that in mind, and I'm going to ask Adam to take it for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Randy, and it's a real pleasure to be here celebrating your 20 years of amazing accomplishments at the Free State Foundation. It's always been a pleasure to work with both you and Seth. So I've been asked to speak about kind of the future of intellectual property and AI, and as a preliminary matter, we are clearly on the cusp of a vast technological, economic, and social revolution with this new technology of what we call AI, which is really large language models. And at this point, the only thing I think you can clearly say with absolute certainty is any prediction made today will clearly be wrong. As Yoda justly and wisely said, right? Difficult to predict the future is always in motion, right? Or if you prefer something a little more serious and down to earth, I think Michelle's discussion of Starlink and the FCC's past failed predictions of the evolution of Starlink is a good example. I mean, if I had said to you in 2005, the guy who founded PayPal was about to revolutionize rocket launch technology and put internet service into space, you would have looked at me like, what drugs am I taking, right? So, and by the way, this isn't a modern phenomenon. This is true of all technological revolutions that we've had. If you had asked someone in 1820 what the future was going to be in 1860, they would have been completely wrong. You didn't have yet electromagnetic telegraphs. You didn't have railroads actually built yet as a system. They were still doing canals. You didn't have mass manufacturing in the United States yet. You didn't have the sewing machine and all these other incredible patented technologies. So I think John was right that to understand where we're going, you first have to understand where we've been, right? And I think here it's very significant 250th anniversary of our country. The founders, a very common phrase in the Constitutional Convention was that they sought to create a machine that would run of itself. And I think they have succeeded in doing so. And intellectual property was very much part of this, as I believe Seth and Randy have beautifully shown and described in their book, Constitutional Foundations of Intellectual Property, right? That they recognized, and the founders in implementing the system in the Federalist era, recognized that a core private property system with rights that were distributed through contracts in the free market was a key to the economic growth of our country and a flourishing innovation economy, and they have proved successful and correct in that prediction, and in history has proven them right. So what does this mean for AI today then? What does this mean going forward? Well, unfortunately, I can't say we have to stay the course. I would love to have been able to say that, but unfortunately in the past 20 years, the United States has radically weakened its intellectual property system. In the copyright context, it's vastly expanded the fair use exception for copyright infringement. Courts have eviscerated the copyright protections that were supposed to be provided by the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. In the patent context, they have incredibly restricted and narrowed the scope of what inventions can be patented, especially in the high-tech space, which AI is. They have eliminated the ability of patent owners to obtain injunctions for continuing ongoing infringement of their property rights. And you have this administrative tribunal at called the PTAB, the Patent Trial and Appeal Board, at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office that has been acting in a very willy-nilly way and canceling patents left and right, sometimes with cancellation rates as high as 80, 90, and even in one program, 100%. Of every patent they reviewed, they found invalid. This has vastly destabilized this platform of reliable and effective property rights that is a driver for economic activity. All economists recognize and agree that property rights are a driver of economic activity, but they can only do that if they are reliable and effective, if you can rely on them and make investments on them and then deploy them in the marketplace and secure them against infringement. So what predictions do we have for AI? Well, if the US wants to continue to lead in this new technological revolution, as it eventually led in the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century, as it led in the biopharma revolution in the 20th century, the biotech revolution, at the late 20th century, the computer revolution, and even the mobile revolution, we have to remember foundations matter. Right? The US founders recognized this, and that's why they put intellectual property in the Constitution and authorized Congress to protect patents and copyrights. Right? They recognized universally that property rights, the rule of law, contract, and free markets are the recipe for success. Right? And that this has been the key, this has been the basis for why the US has succeeded in all of these past technological revolutions. So when it comes to AI then, what should we make of this? Well, AI, and it's really large language models. This is not the world of C-3PO or the Terminator, whichever you believe might be the future of where we're going. I think we need to recognize that AI systems use copyrighted works. They've been using them without authorization. They've been using them for commercial purposes, and that this is infringement. They need to be held accountable for this, and if they are, what will follow from that will be licensing. Licensing deals will occur. Copyright owners want to make money, as do patent owners and all other people in the past with their intellectual property rights. And so courts should recognize that copyright needs to be protected. Patents also will drive investments in business models if AI innovators can obtain patents and trust that they won't be invalidated willy-nilly by the PTAB at the USPTO. So in sum, the United States needs to restore the intellectual property system, right? The original intellectual property system that was implemented in this country that drove all of the past economic and technological revolutions and made the United States a global tech leader. If we do this, and if the US reforms its intellectual property policy and returns to these original IP laws, then it will innovate and continue to lead with the AI revolution and continue to outcompete global competitors like China today. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. I think everyone can see why I'm so proud of our academic advisors and especially the group that you see here today. Okay, now I'm going to try this, but I am going to, we are going to have to be quick. It's like they say, a lightning round. But really, I'm going to start with Michelle. She's writing, so I want her to stop right now. We're going to start with Michelle. Go down this line and add anything else you would like to add about something that you didn't get to say before or anything you've heard. But it's an opportunity for a final remark, a short one.
So one thing I didn't mention is. One thing I didn't mention is that the FCC is currently considering reforming the Universal Service Fund. I'm very happy to hear that. And in their notice of proposed rulemaking, they do acknowledge the fact that the market has changed. But I also see a lot of language in there that's clearly coming from the recipients of the Universal Service Fund in terms of maybe extending things that were already supposed to sunset, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not leaving me tremendously hopeful. And again, I just want to push, we shouldn't be subsidizing suppliers at this point. If we're worried about anything, it should be consumers who don't currently who don't currently adopt and who have low income.
I'd like to be more optimistic, Michelle, but I'm quite confident that when we convene again sometime, there'll be another opportunity to talk about reforming the universal service system. John.
Randy, you're going to like what I have to say because this is an advertisement for your organization. I'll tie it directly back to independence, agency independence. Joseph Kennedy here said that he actually said we need an independent FCC. And I'm here to tell you, you're never going to get one. You probably never had one, but you definitely are not going to get one in the future. I think Daniel Lyons said it's on life support. I would say it's beyond that. It's reached the next phase. But that makes it all the more important that there be political support and understanding among the people of this country about the values that you are trying to bring, Randy, free speech and free markets. And that's why you should support, and why the people in this room and why I support an educational institution like this. And I looked at your mission statement, it's there, it's educational. I think everybody in the room should support this because we won't have an independent FCC or an independent anything. But that's the way maybe it should be in a democratic republic. 1 minute, maybe?
Thank you. Joe, quick.
There's a fundamental disconnect between what we think AI is going to do for us and the capacity of our information networks.
Okay. Daniel?
I'm going to say Michelle's exactly right about USF reform, and I think what we need is not sort of evolutionary change. What we need is revolutionary change, right? In a world where Starlink reaches 99% of the country, there's really not a reason to continue subsidizing build-out. What we really need to do is focus on affordability. That's the gap we really need to close. And once Congress shifts its mindset and thinks about USF in a completely different paradigm, we're more likely to get some lasting results. Will that happen? I'm not optimistic.
But we're going to keep plugging away, as we've done for years, for that goal. Adam.
Just as the last person here, I'm just going to incorporate by reference all of the incredible remarks made by my other panelists and just leave it at that.
Well, again, I'm very proud to have all of you, and I'm grateful that you're members of our academic board. So what I'm going to do now is ask Seth Cooper to come up. Seth is he's the person on our staff, I think, that's contributed over the years, taking the long view, the most to our success. And I'll just say that Seth has a wonderful grounding in the foundational principles that our founders had. So I'm asking him to give a toast. I said to FSF and to America, but you do more for America than FSF here.
Thank you, Randy. 20 years of the Free State Foundation. It's an occasion for celebration and congratulation. Congratulations first to the founder and president of the Free State Foundation, the Randolph J. May. The creation of the Free State Foundation by Randy and by Lori was certainly a product, an endeavor of hard work, good judgment, guts and vision. And I've been blessed with the opportunity to have contributed to what Randy has started and sustained, to help build on it. I benefited from his insights, from his generosity, and from his being truly a gentleman. I've also benefited from the great company that we've had of colleagues at the Free State Foundation over the years. Certainly Kathy Baker, also Ted Bolema, Andrew McLaughlin going over the years, contributions from Andrew Long, and today I'm glad that we have Joe Kennedy and Kathy Sanchez here as part of the team. Randy has already thanked the academic board. I think that they have laid down a standard of excellence in their work that has informed my work and sharpened my thinking. So I'm grateful for them. And I'm grateful for the Free State Foundation supporters we've had over a couple of decades. The support itself, but also the relationships that have been built, even for those that we maybe only see, a couple of times a year, or maybe once every couple of years. It's great to see many faces and people here today. So the Free State Foundation has had, I think, 2 decades of success as a public policy think tank on issues of communications, law and policy, intellectual property, and more, with the essential ingredient being a dedication to the fundamental principles that Randy laid out earlier of the rule of law, limited government, individual liberty, including freedom of speech, private property rights, and free markets. And fundamental principles bring us to today, to the 4th of June, 2026, 1 month out from July 4, 2026, the 250th birthday of America, the quarter millennial of the Declaration of Independence. Now, many excellent people have said many excellent things about the Declaration going over years, including one we will hear from today. And so I'm only going to offer one kind of forest from the trees observation and maybe an assertion about the Declaration. And that is one simple thing about the Declaration that is essential and key to its importance and meaning that's easy to overlook. And so I would ask you I would want to put in your mind and ask you to consider one thing, and that is that the Declaration of Independence is true. Now, what the Founding Fathers wrote in that document, that we are all human beings, all of us, created equal, of equal worth, with possessing rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And by nature of our equality and our rights-bearing nature, government requires a mandate from the people to receive its legitimacy, and that to maintain that legitimacy, it must continue to protect those basic rights. What they asserted there, I say, is a statement of reality. The Declaration is about what is and what ought to be. It was true before 1776, it's true after, it's true today, it will be true tomorrow, and we ought to be thankful for that as we approach the 4th of July. And so with all that said, if you can grab a glass, I would ask you to join me. 20 years of the Free State Foundation and to 250 years of the United States of America. May both of them enjoy many, many years ahead. Thank you.
We should have had champagne. I know as soon as we leave here today, Laurie is going to tell me we should have had champagne, but next time. Thank you, Seth. And again, thanks to all of you. So what we're going to do is serve lunch right now, and we're going to start at 1:30 sharp, if not a few minutes before, with the conversation with Arielle Roth. So let's do whatever it takes to get the lunch started. Okay, we're going to start in just a moment or two, so everyone should find a seat again, either a new seat or the same seat, but find a seat. And we're going to ask Mike O'Reilly and Administrator Roth to come up to the stage. Come on up and have a seat as well. You got it.
Where do you want me to sit?
Just next to Mike. Okay, just continue eating if you haven't finished, but I want to get started. As you know, this is really for me, the highlight of the today's celebration. I just want to remind you that when we get through with this session, Jonathan Turley is going to talk about his important new book, and please stay for that. I've got the book, and I want to make sure I have the book ready for Jonathan. So I want you to stay for that. Okay, now it's my great pleasure to be able to introduce this session with NTIA Administrator Arielle Roth. As you know, former Commissioner Mike O'Reilly, who's now an Adjunct Senior Fellow, is going to formally introduce Arielle, so I'm not going to do that. But before I say something about Arielle, I just want to say once more that I'm really grateful that we have the privilege of having Mike affiliated with the Free State Foundation. I was a great admirer of his when he was a commissioner, and we're grateful now for the contributions he makes to the Free State Foundation. He's got that podcast, TMT, with Mike O'Reilly, that comes out twice a month, and last time I checked, it was getting close to Joe Rogan on those ratings they do. So don't miss an episode of that. So all I really want to say about NTIA Administrator Arielle Roth is this. I've had the pleasure, I guess because I'm old enough, of watching Arielle for quite a few years as she's progressed through different positions, increasingly important positions in the communications policy world. It's been really a pleasure for me to be able to watch that and to watch her continued accession to ever higher things. If she had not become administrator of NTIA, she already would have contributed a lot to the communications policy world and could have rested on her laurels, but she didn't do that, of course, and she's now NTIA administrator. And I guess looking forward, that's been a theme of today's celebration. Looking forward, and I'm quite confident in saying that in the future, Arielle will surely even contribute more to the country as she already has done. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike to have the conversation.
Well, thank you, Randy. I really appreciate the honor to be here, and congratulations on 20 years. What a fabulous success that this organization has been, and the dialogue and the importance of the work that you have provided to comments and debate on really important matters. So a little over 2 years ago, this audience, or many of you, were part of my first video cast, and so we're going to do another one where you just, unwitting audience to my, this is TMT, welcome back to TMT with Mike O'Reilly. My guest is the Honorable Arielle Roth. Her and I share the dislike of reading of her resumes at the introduction, so she is administrator at NTIA, has a great and extensive background on Capitol Hill, and a number of formative years at the FCC. So with that, I thought we'd delve right into the start of some dialogue and make this conversation more lively. They want to hear from you on the important things happening at the agency.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction. What an honor it is to be here, and thank you, Randy, for those incredibly kind remarks. 20 years is such an exciting accomplishment. Free State Foundation has just been a steadfast promoter of free markets, individual liberty, free expression. I always learned so much whenever I attended any of Free State's events, and I'm just so honored to be here. So kudos to Free State, and may you continue to go from strength to strength. And great to be here with my friend, colleague, and former boss, who's been an incredible mentor to me as well.
That's very kind. But Randy, hopefully for the next 20 years, we'll have that champagne, what you promised earlier. Can we start, Administrator? Let's start with BEAD. Top of everyone's mind. We've moved basically from the approval process and the consideration of applications to actual deployment. How is that going, and what have you seen so far?
So we're actually at a really exciting stage in BEAD, with states finally moving into the deployment stage that we've waited so long for. Recently, I was in Nebraska with Governor Pillen, way out in the western part of the state, in a rural part of the state called Ogallala, where one of the country's first BEAD deployments occurred. We visited the site of the tower where a wireless access point was deployed to bring gigabit service to the surrounding community. I met with one of the homeowners there who was getting gigabit service delivered to her farm, and she was just absolutely thrilled. And it occurred just within months of Nebraska's plan getting approved. And I think what's so significant about this, and we're seeing it in other parts of the country as well, like Louisiana, which is also seeing deployment occurring, is that in this part of Nebraska, the provider was delivering gigabit fixed wireless service using unlicensed spectrum. And that was technology that was categorically precluded from participating under the previous administration's rules. I think it really just goes to show the importance of the benefit of the bargain reforms in not only delivering, cost-effective, high-quality service to Americans around the country, but also doing it in a really expeditious manner. And so we're excited to see continued deployment. The states are in the process of negotiating contracts with providers, getting them signed, and finally seeing deployment happening, and looking forward to much similar good news in the months ahead.
Do you have a runway for how long you think deployment, or the vast majority, are going to be done in this time period, or are we at the early stages and a lot of it's going to be back at the end of the backload?
So there's, statutorily, there's a 4-year deployment timeline. We would love to see projects deployed as quickly as possible. And so certainly that's something that we're closely monitoring. I think, again, as I said, having all of the above technology solution is really critical to that expeditious deployment. We're monitoring conditions on the ground. Our NTIA's role has shifted from, approving state plans. Now we've got 54 approved, 52 have signed their award conditions, and the states are signing their contracts with providers. So we're really closely monitoring conditions on the ground, with respect to challenges that providers are going to face. Building broadband is not easy, and we expect to see that issues to come up with labor, with supply, with permitting, as you all know, and we're
Polls,
doing our part to ensure that we're tracking that, we're monitoring the health of the fiber supply chain. We have commitments from large providers that they intend to deliver supply to BEAD providers in a timely fashion to keep us on track. And on permitting, we are closely monitoring the conditions on the ground. We have conditions in our agreements with the states to streamline processing, have single points of contact, maintain permitting roundtables. If there are challenges, elevate them to NTIA. And that's very important. And we also, just count on the providers to have an open dialogue with us. Ultimately, we want to see this program successful, and we're very optimistic about that.
As you're signing, as states are working through, or the broadband offices are working through signing the contracts, is there a chance that states may be reasserting and going to rewrite some of the BEAD obligations that you would kind of tamper down, some policy decisions you had made? Can states, resurrect, I guess is the word I'm looking for, resurrect some of those things? Can NTIA stop that from happening?
So look, BEAD is a federally administered program, but really the states are the eligible entities. It's this unique way that Congress, established the program. We have rules that the states and the companies just can't contract out of. There's no exceptions. They apply to everyone. And we have made clear that we expect them to be upheld. We recently issued a Know Your Rights document, given to ensure that the providers were, knew what their rights are in their contractual negotiations. One of the things that, as you know, we've been very focused on is preventing defaults in the program. And some of the sources, the most significant sources of defaults or risks of default are uncertain regulatory conditions and regulatory experiments in states that drive away investment in BEAD areas. And one of those is rate regulation. We've been very clear that in their contracts with providers, states must include language that to protect providers from such regulatory experiments, harmful regulatory experiments that undermine the success of BEAD projects. And we've also been very clear that states must abide by our permitting obligations to streamline processing and minimize permitting costs and expedite permitting. Those are just some of the ways that we've really tried to ensure that investment is protected and that projects are built in a timely and successful fashion. I think that there's always going to be some gray areas where NTIA's rules are silent, and the states may have their own laws on the books, and they're, as I said, they're negotiating with the states on sub-grantee agreements, and so that can sometimes raise challenges between the providers and the states. That's something that we're monitoring closely. We continue to be a resource in the event that there are questions from both the states and the providers. We continue to issue FAQs. But I think that so far we're seeing some really good results. Lots of states signing sub-grantee agreements with providers. And God willing, we'll see significant progress in the months ahead.
Well, best wishes on BEAD. Lots of hard work and families that need connectivity. So God bless. Let's switch topics a little bit. Talk maybe to spectrum. There's a lot of gray-haired people out there that lived through Congress passing, after many years, new auction authority. And let me get this right here, it's the Working Families Tax Cut Act. And NTIA had obligations under that to identify bands, a substantial amount of spectrum under the law. What should stakeholders look into milestones for NTIA identifying? That not only do they have 3 identified bands in the law, but also identifying the full plate of spectrum that needs to be put forth.
Yeah, so I've said repeatedly, we need an all of the above approach to spectrum, more spectrum for everyone. We want to lead in 6G, and making sure that 6G can get deployed means making more commercial spectrum access available, which is at the heart of the spectrum provisions in the Working Families Tax Cut Act, as well as opportunities for more access to satellite spectrum, commercial spaces, an area where the U.S. leads, and we are very committed to ensuring that the right spectral conditions are in place to ensure that America continues to innovate and lead in this area. And we also are a leader when it comes to unlicensed innovation. That's something that China has been pushed back on by identifying the 6 gigahertz band for mobile commercial use. And that's a band that we continue to monitor to maintain our leadership in that area and convince the world to go in the American direction when it comes to unlicensed spectrum. But if I could maybe just give an update on the bands that we're looking at, lots of positive news. As you said, there's a number of bands that we're looking at to get to our statutory requirement of identifying 500 megahertz of federal spectrum to be reallocated for commercial license use. This was thanks to the leadership of President Trump and the Trump administration in identifying 6G leadership as a huge priority for this administration. And that's why we have the biggest pipeline in history. So the work is on us to get it done in a timely manner, and we hope to meet or hopefully exceed our deadlines and targets. The first band that I think is probably the most far ahead is the 7 gigahertz band. The president actually put us on a deadline to identify spectrum in that band by December. We're fully on track to do that, and it's a huge part of our strategy to counter China's 6 gigahertz focused approach to 6G. It's a huge opportunity, potential to identify up to 275 megahertz of valuable spectrum for commercial use, which would exceed not only our deadline of identifying 200 megahertz in 2 years, but hopefully also the amount of spectrum we have to identify in that period. We're working on the 2.7 gigahertz band. I know that you recently had a blog post on the importance of making that the band available for commercial use, something that we fully agree with. We recently announced that the OMB, FCC, and NTIA Tech Panel had signed off on spectrum relocation funds for that band so that the incumbent agencies could, under NTIA's leadership, could perform the requisite engineering studies to relocate systems and make the spectrum available for commercial use. Now we're in a period of a 60-day statutorily required notification to Congress that's going to end on June 30th. So we're hopeful that the SRF, what's called the Spectrum Relocation Funds, become available so we can complete that engineering work and get the spectrum identified as soon as possible and hopefully auctioned during this administration. The 4 gigahertz band is another band that we're really excited about, a band with many different agencies that use that spectrum, but it's very valuable given its propagation characteristics. It's a little further behind 2.7. SRF funding isn't available quite yet, but we're on track to get it with the 9 incumbents in the band having submitted their blueprints to NTIA for pipeline plans. And then finally, there's spectrum in the L band, our down payment that we've already identified, 5 megahertz in 1675 to 1680 megahertz. And we're also looking at the 15 megahertz above that, including potentially for direct-to-cell usage. As I said earlier, this is an area that we lead in commercial space. Direct-to-cell is definitely a very exciting area where the U.S. leads, and we're really excited to getting that band across the finish line as well.
NTIA-led revitalization, what role will the spectrum.gov have in providing a picture to the public? Is that the value? What will that bring to us?
Yeah, so as some of you know, NTIA recently unveiled a website, spectrum.gov. You know, when I was a staffer on Capitol Hill, I always found that you know, the process of studying and reallocating federal spectrum to be kind of opaque. And so one of the things we've done is we've tried to make that process more transparent. And so we have a dashboard of the steps needed to get to identification of spectrum, and we're updating our progress with respect to the bands in the pipeline. So that's one feature of the website. We're also, sharing work that we're doing in preparation for important standards setting meetings, including the 2027 World Radio Communication Conference, and also just generally giving information to the public about our work on spectrum, whether it's with respect to the studies or whether it's respect to launch spectrum, access to spectrum for satellite, and the just making the process more transparent. And we welcome the public's feedback on the website, how we can make it more helpful and useful, and continue to provide information on our activities, because I've always believed that having a more transparent and accountable agency really delivers it delivers better outcomes in terms of policy.
Can you talk a little bit about the Spectrum Relocation Fund? A little clunky in its operations. Have you had any difficulty with its regime and what it should look like?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question. So, I mean, I alluded to this before, but with respect to bands that are getting reallocated from federal to non-federal use, there's a process for the developing engineering studies to facilitate that reallocation, and that's done primarily through the Spectrum Relocation Fund. That provides funding to incumbent agencies to study and the NTIA to study the relocation of systems, so that critical federal systems can find a home. It's kind of like a puzzle that needs to be solved on the front end before the FCC can auction the spectrum. And it's also really important for the success of an auction, because if you don't perform the requisite engineering work, then there's uncertainty with respect to the amount of spectrum that can be auctioned and under what parameters. So this funding from the Spectrum Relocation Fund is very important for having a successful auction, because an auction has to ultimately pay for the relocation costs. One of the challenges that I've seen, and it's really only been working through the process firsthand, is that there's maybe some bureaucracy in the process that may not be necessary, and maybe holding up our ability to auction bands as expeditiously as possible. So, like, for example, not only does the tech panel need to sign off on an agency's pipeline plan, which includes OMB, FCC, and NTIA, but then the OMB director then personally needs to sign off. There's a requirement of a 60-day congressional notification. So these are just things that kind of, maybe are slowing down the process in a manner that doesn't necessarily advance the objective of making spectrum available expeditiously. And I think the most critical thing that we've recently seen as an obstacle is what's known as the SRF gap. So once the FCC once spectrum is identified for the by the FCC for an auction, they have to notify NTIA 18 months before the auction, and so that they can pursue their pre-auction activities. The SRF funding cuts off, and that's statutorily, and so you can't have you can't run the processes simultaneously. The band studies can't get cut off once the FCC process starts, and so running them simultaneously might be a way to gain better efficiency and expedite our ability to auction. And that's so important because getting spectrum into the marketplace like 6 months sooner can be really critical in terms of our technology leadership as well as our economic leadership.
Well, sounds like NTIA's got some ideas for Congress on how to make that process a little simpler. They're good for you.
Yeah, it's always obviously defer to Congress. It's up to Congress. This is the law we have, and we will abide by it. But we always are, welcome the opportunity to share ideas on how to improve processes.
One of your focuses before you went to the NTIA, and certainly you've talked about it since, has been screen times in classrooms. I've got 2 kids. You've got a number of kids, more than 2. And it's interesting to see how technology has been implemented in our schools system, and I'm sure in yours. How does NTIA or the administration ensure that the ed tech prioritizes the technology that's being deployed? It's about learning and student well-being, not just engagement.
Great question, and one that's very near and dear to my heart, not only as a telecom policymaker, but also as a mother of 6 who's personally grappled with the challenge of my kids' technology use. And this has really become an across the administration effort. HHS recently released a regulatory toolkit and advisory on children's excessive screen time. NTIA launched an initiative actually at Free State Foundation last fall, announcing an initiative on kids' excessive screen time, and we held a really successful listening session, bringing together parents, teachers, and child development experts to discuss this challenge and also the levers at the disposal of federal policymakers and what were the market trends and policies that were driving this phenomenon of children's screen use in schools. Something that really has become, technology use has risen in recent years, and it was especially, it seemed to especially become much more prevalent during COVID, and some of those trends have lingered. You see one-to-one device usage in many schools across the country, tablet usage as young as kindergarten, and I think it's gotten parents really, asking questions that, parents can only do so much to, restrict their children's technology use at home, and then, there's been, I think, a perception that maybe we've gone a little overboard, and we need to ensure that technology use in schools is done in a thoughtful way rather than an indiscriminate way. Maybe more isn't always better. And I think the research really bears that out recently. I've really, appreciated the research of neuroscientists like Jared Cooney-Horvath, who's really examined the impact of screen use on memory and on reading and critical thinking. So just really important issues. Really excited that yesterday Chairman Carr launched a review of the E-rate program to ensure that the program is operating ultimately in the interest of children. Something that I've tracked throughout my career, and it's just really critical. And he's really focused on, as the Trump administration is, on the issue of empowering parents. I think one of the challenges with any FCC programs or FCC rulemakings in general is that they attract lobbyists, consultants, regulatory counsel, and in this case, like the voices that we want to hear from are those who are directly affected by technology in schools: parents, teachers, children, they don't always have the right resources, the expertise. They don't, have the regulatory counsel to go and lobby for their interests before the FCC. It's kind of like a classic public choice problem. And then, so instead you have a scenario where the voices dominating the conversation are not necessarily the voices promoting the interests of children. They're promoting the interests of, lobbyists, consultants, and companies. I think it's really important as the FCC pursues this important rulemaking to ensure that the right voices are at the table. One of, I think, the roles that NTIA can play is as a convener in bringing together the stakeholders, as we did at our listening session last year. So we're actually planning, a subsequent listening session that's really specifically focused on the FCC rulemaking, and ensure that those important stakeholders who we want at the table are able to share their voice and share their perspective so that we get to the right rules. Because it's one thing to ask the questions in the rulemaking. We also need to have a robust record. So what we're hoping to do is convene those important voices so that ultimately this rulemaking is successful. And just kudos to the FCC for looking at this issue. It's really important, not just as a matter of kids' screen time is obviously the critical focus, but also just as we look at the entire USF, so much has changed in the last several decades when it comes to technology. Now we have the BEAD program. So it's just very important to be looking at these programs to ensure that they're not distortionary, that they're in line with our American priorities for leading the world on technology innovation, and protecting the interests of consumers and ratepayers.
Is that listening session, is that new? Is that something I wasn't aware of that?
Yeah, no, we're working on planning it right now.
Okay. Well, there we go. How about we switch topics a little bit? What can you share on Commerce Secretary Lutnick's deal with AT&T on FirstNet? Can we talk about FirstNet for a couple of minutes? And what do you expect in terms of the impact on public safety and oversight of FirstNet?
No, it's a great question. NTIA oversees the FirstNet Authority, the Public Safety Broadband Network. I think this was established in back in 2012. There has been a lot of interest in FirstNet, especially with the upcoming reauthorization of the program. Obviously, we share the view of public safety that it's critical for public safety to have reliable, ubiquitous connectivity in times of emergency. So ensuring that FirstNet maximizes benefits for public safety in terms of that reliability and ubiquitous connectivity, as well as takes advantage of technological evolution. The technology landscape has shifted so much over even the last few years, and we want to ensure that first responders are able to take advantage of that. There's been some challenges in recent years regarding the confusion over roles and the role of the FirstNet board and the role of NTIA and the role of the FirstNet Authority. I think that's something that the House really sought to address in their reauthorization efforts. And so, ensuring that, so just applaud the House for their work on the bill, and it really takes a thoughtful approach to ensuring that FirstNet is, that the lines of accountability are clear. And we've also been, very involved in oversight of FirstNet to ensure that to ensure that we're doing our due diligence and review of task orders so that they really are effectuating the vision of the public safety community and the board. That really culminated in it was thanks to that oversight that we were able to provide recommendations to Secretary Lutnick, and he was able to negotiate an additional $2 billion in value for public safety in the contractual framework. And so, really excited about that. Ultimately, our goal is ensuring that FirstNet is delivering and continues to deliver maximum benefits for public safety, and ultimately that the program is a success. We think that the deal that Secretary Lutnick really delivers in that respect.
On a related public safety issue, NG 911, the NTIA just completed an analysis. It hasn't been done since, I think, 2018. And I'm interested to know, what did you find? And specifically, I was intrigued by one of the published points that the estimated cost of the transition to full NG 911 may have dropped by 50%.
Yeah, so on that topic, NTIA, as you know, there have been several proposals in Congress, a lot of interest on the topic of next generation 911 and ensuring that that 911 is reliable, and that when you call 911 that it works. And part of that is involves modernizing 911 systems. So the last time that the administration had done a study on the cost of nationwide NG 911 implementation, that was back in 2017, and a lot has changed since then. We've seen many states invest heavily in modernizing their 911 networks. And invest in NG 911 deployment. We've also seen a larger shift in the NG 911 industry from one of those kind of based on upfront deployment costs to more of a subscription-based model with larger recurring costs than the legacy system, but with fewer upfront costs. And so we provided a study. We released a study, I think it was last month, to really provide helpful information on this current state of the marketplace and on what we estimate an objective nationwide cost would be. We've seen a significant reduction from the previous study to now, and that we felt was helpful information to share with policymakers as well as Congress, because ultimately this wasn't about issuing policy recommendations, but really providing more information. That's where I think NTIA can really provide a helpful role, and so we've gotten great feedback on the report. I think that it's always helpful to share more data and more information.
Last policy issue. Let's turn back to Spectrum a little bit. One of NTIA's functions, as I remember, international communications policy. WRC 27, China. What do you anticipate being the sticking points for the administration going forward, and how is that process developing? How will the public be able to define success?
Thanks. It's a really, really important question. This administration is laser focused on ensuring that the U.S. leads internationally on standards and at WRC. This was even in the presidential memorandum on winning the race to 6G. It highlighted the importance of rallying our allies around U.S. positions and working strategically to advance our priorities in international fora. And so NTIA is working with our colleagues at State Department, FCC, and the White House to get our positions finalized early so that we can go in a strong position at WRC where we're leading and working successfully with our allies rather than following or letting our adversaries drive the conversation. We've finalized 5 American positions in advance of our previous regional meeting, CTEL. We're working to finalize the rest of them in advance of the next regional meeting that precedes WRC. So, that is, miles ahead of where we were the previous administration at this time in preparing for WRC. And that's really thanks to, as I alluded to before, the leadership of this administration and the prioritization of our 6G leadership. The agenda at WRC 27 is actually going to be very satellite heavy, and that's obviously an area where we lead, and we want to continue to advance our interests. One of the things that we recently did to promote U.S. positions related to commercial space is we held a training in Ghana with key African countries. It was focused on not only the importance and the benefits of granting market access to American satellite operators and the benefits that could bring their countries in terms of ubiquitous connectivity and economic development, but also on the importance of ensuring a healthy international regulatory environment for commercial space. There's been kind of a trend towards certain nations trying to establish what they call sovereignty over space and certain protectionist impulses to limit market access, reserve orbital planes, and generally, some countries consider these services to be have pursued regulations and positions that don't necessarily align with the interests of U.S. commercial space. And we were really successful, actually, in convincing key countries to side with U.S. positions on some of the key items going into WRC on commercial space. But certainly there's more work to be done. There's a really problematic agenda item being pushed by Iran. It's agenda item 1.5 that's focused on requiring satellite operators to turn off their transmissions or their terminals as their satellites are traveling over a country, which raises challenges with respect to not only just the cost of deploying global satellite systems, but also potentially public safety repercussions. And it's also not necessary for the ITU to be regulating in this area. And so, that's definitely one item that we've really been tracking. At the same time, some of you may be aware, the European Commission recently issued a proposal, a protectionist proposal on the 2 gigahertz MSS band to reserve spectrum for European operators, which is really inconsistent with our tradition of open, non-discriminatory access in the United States. We expect Europe to abide by those same principles, especially when the consequences of not doing that and promoting a protectionist agenda really means cutting off Europeans from really innovative services. In the proposal, there's a prohibition on the incumbents from transferring or subleasing their rights in the 2 years while the proceeding is pending. I think it's just some of these protectionist approaches or something. We've seen real trends on this that the U.S. has been very focused on pushing back on. There's in addition to satellite items, we're obviously closely watching, closely engaged on the identification of spectrum for 6G. China's obviously been pushing 6 gigahertz, and so working on finalizing our positions to put forth a strong alternative That's agenda item 1.7. And then finally, one other thing I would just add is that we're also, I was in Geneva for an ITU council meeting last month, and had several bilaterals with countries on many of these issues. In addition, we just need to make sure that leadership at the ITU is favorable to our ability to promote our strategic interests. Right now, we have 3 candidates running for ITU elections. That's Doreen Bogdan-Martin for the Secretary of the ITU, and Jennifer Warren for the Radio Regulations Board, and the U.S. is also seeking re-election for ITU Council. Having success in ITU leadership is really important to ensure a fair conference where we're able to pursue our interests without interference, especially given that the site of WRC 27 in Shanghai.
All right, last question, an easy one and quick. Are you enjoying your time at NTIA?
Yeah, 100%. It's a huge blessing. I get to work with amazing colleagues, very challenging but interesting issues, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to serve our president and our country.
Well, please thank Administrator Roth for her public service and chairing the panel. So thank you so very much.
Stay there for 1 minute. Even if you had said that you weren't enjoying your time at NTIA, I'm awfully glad you're there. It's really important work that you're doing. You've given us the benefit of understanding what you're doing and how important it is. And I'm glad that you're the one that's over there doing it. We're going to keep watching you at FSF. We always do. But I can just say you're doing a good job, and keep at it. Now, I'd like to give you a little token of appreciation for doing that. It's a Free State Foundation hat. I meant to give these to you guys. I've got yours as well, the academic advisors. But I want you to take this, and the next time you appear, I'll try and have something even different. But one more time, let's thank Arielle Roth and Mike O'Reilly